Hello, I'm Dr. John Iskander, Scientific Director for CDC Public Health Grand Rounds. Our 2019 season tackled challenging topics from preventing cervical cancer to childhood lead exposure to Legionnaire's disease to intellectual disabilities. You can watch all these excellent sessions on our Grand Rounds on-demand website. We open our 2020 season with the emerging role of pathogen genomics in January, followed by a session which will discuss the current state of measles. You won't want to miss any of these. I'm pleased to announce a new Grand Rounds product beginning in 2020. For your convenience, our Beyond the Data segment will now be a podcast instead of a video. These will be 5-minute conversations with subject matter experts that you can listen to when you have the time, wherever you get your podcasts. Our audiences include clinicians, healthcare providers, students of public health, medicine, and nursing, as well as the general public. We're looking forward to providing you, our audience, with scientifically accurate, easily accessible information through our live webcasts, our Grand Rounds on-demand website, and our new Beyond the Data podcasts. Thank you for being loyal Grand Rounds followers. We hope you stay with us for the coming year.